Hello and welcome to the first episode of CPCine, the Amstrad CPC magazine show where we chart the life of Amstrad's phenomenal home computer. We're starting with June and July of 1984, right at the launch of the CPC. So this week, let's take a look at how the Arnold, as it was affectionately known, began its long life as a home computer. The CPC went on sale in June 1984 in both green screen and colour screen versions, following its much publicised launch event a few months earlier in April. Initially priced at £249 and £359 respectively, this put the CPC at the higher end of home computer pricing and landed at initial comparisons with the more high-end home computers such as the BBC. The system is made up of a brilliantly designed base unit that integrates a cassette player with a full travel keyboard that's not all too different to what you would find on a modern computer. The keys on the launch system are big, feel good when you type on them, and the special function keys being picked out in bright colours makes the system lovely to look at. Although we all know it would eventually end up battling the C64 and the Spectrum in the public's minds, the CPC was very clearly not aiming right at the lowest price point in the market. Amstrad's sights were set on building an all-rounder, not an entry-level system or a games machine. By bundling a monitor and quickly bringing both disk drives and CP/M to the system, Amstrad were positioning themselves as the go-to provider for the home office and small business markets, which also meant that they were well set to cater for the leisure market and hobbyists at the same time. There are only two wires to connect to get the Amstrad CPC 464 up and running, and both connect to the monitor that comes with it. One is a power supply, and the other is a video signal. You'll need to connect both if you want to use the monitor, but if you prefer to use a television instead, you can forgo both wires and instead connect up the system to the MP1 modulator. But we'll have more on that later. Once the system is up and running, most people begin their computing life by taking a look at the Welcome to Amsoft tape. Side 1 is basically a demo of what the system can do. It showcases spreadsheet capabilities, business and game graphics, the CPC's versatile sound, courtesy of General Instruments AY38912 sound chip, and yes, that is a bit of a mouthful, and that's about it. It's not the most interesting of software, but it does get the job done. Side 2 is where you, the proud new owner of a CPC 464, can actually start using the computer. Here, we have a nice little program that teaches you the layout of the keyboard. I was always disappointed because of this program that the escape key doesn't print a sad face on the screen, even though escape is clearly shown as a face on this screen. What can I say? I was 5. The next program lets you create your own characters. These will replace the inbuilt character set on the CPC font if you will, although it's not actually a font and we could fill an entire video on why it's not. Again, this program was always a little bit disappointing because when you've designed your character, there's nothing you can do with it. Very soon after the CPC launched, you would find character creation programs and little bits of software for development of that kind in type-ins and sold professionally. So there was clearly a market, Amstrad identified it, they just didn't quite follow through with it. The final program is the one that most people would have spent the most time on. It's a demo of a game, albeit a fairly simple one. Word Hang is Amsoft's version of Computer Hangman, and it's actually pretty good. Once you've played, it gives you a quick advert telling you about the full game. Want to play again? Fine, go ahead, but you'll get the advert again afterward. Like I said, it's a demo, and a lot of computers after the Amstrad would have demos like this, but it's a pretty decent demo, especially for one that comes packaged with the system. Overall, the Amstrad came straight out of the box as a well-rounded home computer. The demos and the welcome tape show a little bit of what you can actually get from this computer. It's not exactly in-depth as here is everything you can do, but then again, a lot of the things that the Amstrad could do were only discovered by tinkering with it. It was there to be tinkered with, to play around, see what you can get out of it yourself. And the welcome tape does a decent job at showing the basics. So, in the end, it's not a bad package, and it's a pretty good introduction to the CPC world. Amstrad positioned the CPC 464 at the higher end of the home computer market, making it perfect for home office and small business users, as well as kids and adults who wanted a computer with a bit of oomph to it. Consequently, the CPC has some very cool features that are well worth taking a look at. Firstly, let's take a look at the CPC's memory capacity. As the name suggests, the CPC 464 comes with 64K of built-in memory, 42K of which is available to the user after BASIC and Amstrad have been loaded into memory. There were 64K and 128K memory expansions available, but this extra memory was not made available via BASIC without the use of bank managing software, which usually came packaged with the expansions, and was also available on the system disk of the CPC 6128, but we'll have more of that in a later episode. When disks arrived, the 464's memory would reduce to 41K of available memory due to an additional 1K being needed by the computer to handle the extra information needed to manage disks. Things like which drive you were currently working on, A or B, which user area you were in on the disk, and so forth. This would introduce some incompatibilities with older software that used the full 42K of available space, but again, more on that in a later episode. In contrast to the CPC's rivals, the memory available to users on boot up is substantial. A Commodore 64 user has 38K of RAM available to users once the computer's ROM was loaded in, which is a pretty decent amount of memory available to the average user, I think we'll all admit. The ZX Spectrum, coming in both 16 and 48K versions initially, has a variable amount of memory available to the end user, but neither amount matched the CPC's usable RAM. Consequently, you got a lot more space to play with from your CPC right out of the box. That's very useful to home coders and anyone wanting to work with large files, such as a long payroll sheet or other business applications. Again, Amstrad catering to different users than the standard home gamer. Now let's move on to the function keys. Unlike a lot of other systems, such as the Commodore 64 and BBC, you may be hard-pressed to locate the function keys on a CPC at first. That's because the 464 has a separate numeric keypad that doubles as a set of function keys. It's a nice feature that makes these keys far more useful to the average user. All function keys are user programmable from BASIC, and a number of Office programs make use of them. As the first issue of Amstrad's official magazine pointed out, and we'll have more on that when we cover its launch in the next episode, programming the function keys was a good idea if you were programming your CPC, as it meant you could have a lot of often used commands literally at your fingertips. The second cool feature of the CPC was its ability to split its screen display into regions, which the manual calls windows, but which a modern user would not recognise as a window like we know it now. Let's stick with calling them windows, however, for history's sake. The window command sets a specific area of screen as separate from the rest of the screen, allowing it to hold its own pen and paper colours, and also scrolling it independently of the rest of the screen. This is useful in a number of programs, especially something like a text adventure, where you might want the room description to scroll separately from a graphic or the area for the user to input commands. 8 windows are possible on a CPC at any one time, and they can be overlapped. Printing to Windows 0 will always print to the standard display, however, and it's worth noting that printing to Windows 9 will write to a cassette, which opens up a great deal of possibilities for data storage and output in your own software. All in all, the CPC was a very impressive piece of hardware for its time, and it's easy to see why so many computer magazines at that time were impressed with its capabilities. As 8-bit computers go, the CPC 464 still holds its own even today, and while the old playground battles sadly seem like they will not go away anytime soon, the CPC is still a winner on the hardware front. Now, let's take a look at some of the software available when the 464 launched. But before we start, I want to say it's one of those annoying things where there doesn't seem to be a concise document that lists all of the products that Amstrad made available in terms of software when the CPC 464 launched. So we've got to go off adverts and a few other things like that. There were 18 programs available right from the start of the CPC's life, thanks to Amstrad's decision to announce the CPC months before it would be made available to the public, and making sure several developers had early versions of the CPC sent to them to get programs put out quickly. One of the launch titles for the CPC was Sultan's Maze, a pseudo 3D arcade adventure game where you have to collect the precious jewels left hidden in Hampton Court Maze by a medieval sultan who was robbed there. Inside the maze is the ghost of the sultan's bodyguard who will attack you if you get too close. So far, so very much like a computer game of its era. Shockingly, this game is coded entirely in BASIC, which you can discover for yourself when you quit out of the game. While in the game, pressing escape will not break the flow because the escape key is remapped to prevent this, but if you press Q and quit out, you will then be sent back to the Amstrad ready prompt, at which point you can simply list all 650 lines of game code. Yes, that's right, Someone coded a fully functional pseudo 3D game in just over 650 lines of basic code in 1984. That's really impressive. What's even more impressive is that as a launch title, this game would have been coded in 2 weeks, because that's how long Amstrad gave out test machines in order to get initial games and other software coded. So I'm really impressed. Sadly, the rest of the game is not so equally impressive. The sound is the absolute bare minimum of bleeps and audio squiggles. The game is slow and infuriatingly difficult because everything you do will sap your already limited energy. Although of course you could enter the code and change that if you wanted to. But that's not the point. The ghost moves randomly, which results in a lot of boredom because there are minutes of essentially dead game time where all you're doing is wandering around the maze without even a hint of peril, only to find that when you eventually make it to the next duel, you don't have the energy to carry it anymore. Oh yeah, carrying duels saps your energy. How heavy are these duels? For a launch title, Sultan's Maze is suitably impressive. For a basic game, the Pseudo 3D is very cool. If you play it now, it's not bad, but it's not a game that will keep you coming back for more, and to be honest, I'm not sure it ever was. One of the 18 pieces of software available at launch for the Amstrad CPC 464 was Easy Amsword, a word processor from Amsoft that showed how the CPC could be used for both home and business needs. It's a basic word processor, and we already saw its ability to justify text and display multiple columns of text on screen at once, a very useful tool if you're putting together a local newsletter, for example. So instead of going into those features, I thought I'd give the software a quick run through to see how it handled. In short, it handled very poorly. It's a slow program. It takes a noticeable amount of time to backspace, which makes it very easy to delete too many lines and end up having to retype a lot of things. And it seems to have trouble moving between lines of text, which makes editing things a little tricky. As a launch title, it's not a bad piece of software, but it's not great, and it's very easy to see how Amsword was quickly overtaken by better packages. The first typing I want to cover in the show actually comes from the CPC 464's manual. Unlike many computers, modern ones especially, the CPC came with a comprehensive manual that was an absolute boon to bedroom coders, demo makers, and anyone who fancied trying their hand at getting their new computer to do anything more than load a cassette. Thanks to having owned several 464s over the years, I now have 3 of these manuals, and they all retain pride of place on my shelves. The original manual is a large ring-bound book, which makes it perfect for sitting open on a table while you're using it. Later editions came as perfect bound books, which meant that any use of them while operating the computer, such as trying to type in one of the programs included in it, would be a problem. That's why you found so many copies of these manuals with severely damaged spines. The manual comes with several typing programs included, with each of them teaching you a few aspects of the CPC's inbuilt and comprehensive basic programming language. The BBC Basic may have become the dominant one, but I still believe the CPC's Basic is one of the best around in home computers, especially the expanded version found in the 664 and 6128. And these type-ins do a lot to showcase just what this computer could do. So let's take a look at one of them now. This is the Sound and Colour Demonstration program from the manual's Foundation course, an introductory basic programming course included in the manual. In Chapter 3 of the course, see, I told you the manual was comprehensive, we'll see this program, which displays the different colours available for the CPC and plays a short tune while doing it. I've chosen this particular program because it highlights a number of nice features in CPC Basic, rather than because it's an interesting program in and of itself. There are more fun programs later on in the manual, including a reasonably decent card game, but this one is pretty important. What we have here is a listing that teaches you a lot more than you might think at first glance. For a start, look at how it's teaching you that CPC Basic is not case sensitive. In line 20, we create a variable, we'll call it b. We create it in lowercase and use it in a for next loop, which is one of the fundamentals of programming, so it's nice to see it included so early. On line 30, we then use the variable b to print a number on the screen as an addendum to the print command, but here we refer to b in uppercase form. The CPC doesn't care whether you use upper or lowercase for variables, so it's important to know that early on. It's also useful to note that while we haven't left a space after the text in the print command, the CPC will insert one anyway before it prints the number from the variable. That's something to keep in mind when programming, and once again, this code is teaching you that. The typing also shows you how to string information together in CPC Basic when outputting to the screen. In more popular languages these days, you can create a string from multiple parts and echo it to the screen all at once by combining them using the plus sign, but the CPC handles things a bit differently. In CPC Basic, a plus sign is an addition, so to print multiple things to the screen, you append them to one another using a semicolon. Hence, on lines 30, 60 and 70, we have a print command to print a line of text, followed by a semicolon, followed by a variable. Notice that we don't have to tell the CPC to print the variable as a string, it will just do it. That's standard for Basic, but if you're coming to the CPC from other programming languages, you often need to use a converter command, so it's good to know that you don't need one here. Lastly, notice that the commands throughout the entire listing are presented in lowercase. That's because, once again, CPC Basic doesn't care what case you input things in. This is a very useful trick to know, because it's a very good way of debugging your listings. If the CPC understands a command that you've entered is a basic command, it will convert it to uppercase in its memory, and will output the command in uppercase when you use the list command to check what you've entered. Any command that you have typed in incorrectly will not be converted, so you can quickly spot spelling errors. That's a very useful trick that has saved me from a great deal of headaches when coding my own software over the years. All in all, this is a very smart little program that teaches you a lot about the Amstrad CPC and its basic interpreter. So what does the program look like when you run it? Yeah, it's pretty basic stuff, all things considered. Not everyone wanted to use the monitor bundled with their CPC. Maybe you had a large screen television, or maybe the monitor broke, as these things sometimes do. Maybe you forked out for the green screen CPC and now want to give colour a try but don't want to pay a premium for a colour monitor. Whatever the reason, Amstrad has you covered. The MP1 is a TV modulator peripheral that allows your CPC to send a signal to your television. It works by converting the digital signal of the CPC to a standard RF output that your TV can tune into, or, if you're in France, it outputs in SCART. The basic idea is simple, and so are the internal components of the device. Sadly, there's a lot of noise and interference in the signal from these things, so tuning them in can be an immense pain in the backside. I, for one, couldn't get a clear signal when using my MP1 on any of my TVs, and my video capture system couldn't get any signal whatsoever. While I knew someone with one of these back in the 80s, they tended to just stick with a green screen monitor, because at least it had a clear display. When the CPC 664 launched in 1985, an updated modulator, the MP2, was launched alongside it. This is basically the same unit, only now there's an additional 12-volt power supply added, which the 664, and not long after the 6128, needs to power its disk drive. Unfortunately, because it basically is the same device just with an extra power line, it has the same problems with signal output, and I can't recommend having one these days. If you're really into your retro hardware, an MP1 modulator makes a nice addition to your collection, but for anyone who's serious about using their CPC on a modern television or video capture system, you are far better off grabbing a SCART converter from eBay or building one yourself. Instructions are available from the CPC wiki at the address on screen and in the description bar below. Now, let's round out this first episode by taking a look at the collaborative 30-year Megademo. This is an amazing piece of work with every aspect of the demo shining with polish. Type cat to see what you need to run to start the demo and you'll be presented with a very cool override of the disk catalog system, which gives you the instructions you need to get started. Follow these instructions and prepare to be amazed. Let's start with the most eye-opening part of this, the menu. It's no ordinary menu, it's a fantastic little light gun game where you scroll around a beautiful cityscape firing at the demo maker whose section of this gem you want to see. The scrolling is silky smooth, the graphics are bold and beautiful. You could be forgiven for thinking this was a 16-bit game, and I don't say that lightly. So I'm impressed right out of the gate, and it's only getting better from here on in. The music is superb throughout. The demo sections are all superbly produced, with slick video tricks like this screen grab from an emulator, because at the moment I can't get my hardware to send a stable video signal right now, sorry about that, just doesn't do justice. Watch this on a real CPC, you will be amazed. Some of the techniques in here will be familiar to you if you've ever seen a demo before, but every single one feels like it's been tweaked, reworked to make it faster, or just pushed that little way further than before. I think my favourite has to be the beautiful way Shinra has put a translucent font into their section. It may be a fairly small part of their demo, but it's immensely effective against the waving blue and white background. Plus, the music in that section is so incredibly catchy. Overall, this is a demo that needs to be seen. If you haven't taken a look already, go and do so now, because I think you'll be impressed. Well, that's all we have time for this week, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to click that like button, and do subscribe for future videos because in the next episode, we'll take a look at the launch of the first magazine for the new CPC, and pick up on all the news for August 1984, when the CPC has had time to bed in as a new player on the block. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson, you've been watching CPCine, the Amstrad CPC magazine, on the Knob Mouse channel, and I'll see you next time.